Good morning, everyone. Hi. We're going to start. Thank you very much for coming to this session. When news breaks bad, UGC in the newsroom. Just in case you thought you were in a different session, we are going to be talking about UGC ethics and focus quite a lot on the code that was launched this morning by Jane. So just to give you a bit of background on this code and what we'll be talking about today, it was 2012, a group of news organizations got together to talk about the need for collaborating on a code of practice and a code of ethics for the way that we treat contributors of UGC, of how we reach out to them, how we talk about verification, how we, later on, it moves on to how we protect both our journalists and sources. It came about because of the fast-moving nature of the technology and as a relevant technology for news. We didn't have the luxury of several years or a decade of best practice to develop. We needed to start working on things, come to some kind of level of understanding quite quickly. And so we set up a working group to start doing that, and at ONA's conferences in the US, we encourage people to join us, and the group that contributed to it grew. I know many of you in this room will have been part of those conversations at some point. So that's the background. I'll hand over to Mandy now.
Great. Yeah, Fergus and I were just talking a little bit earlier about the early days of this particular code, and really just how much has changed in that time. And this is such an important thing for ONA and for our members, because that we're constantly dealing in a world of unknowns. When you're forging the path ahead of you, you're not really sure. You're not sure what you're going to be finding in there. So what we've learned over these last few years, and what we've been able to apply, and from talking to lots of different news organizations, our own included, we've really been able to start to figure out some ways that we can start to make sense of all that's unknown out there, and that's exactly what ONA is trying to be about. We're helping our members figure out their day-to-day worlds in working in news.
So we're going to talk to you today broadly about UGC, but we're going to pin it to the various elements of this code, because we want to explain the thinking behind it, give you an overview of where we think the industry stands on this, where it's going right, where it's going wrong, and some examples that will back that up. The language in this document was agonized over a lot. I mean, every single word in here has been scrutinized by many people. So we've come to we can help answer any questions about it if you've got them, and please do put your hand up or shout out or throw a piece of paper at us if you have a question, and we can answer it. But what we really want to do is, if you are not the person, if you think that this code might work for your newsroom, then and you need to have an answer as to what you take back to your boss. If there's a question your boss is going to ask about implementing this code, then those are the questions that we want, as well as any kind of broader questions about UGC. So this is what I'm displaying on the screen at the moment is the introduction to the code. This is all online, and we'll just dive straight into the first point. So, endeavoring to verify the authenticity of user-generated content before publishing or distributing it, holding it to standards that are equal or equivalent to those maintained for content acquired through other means. So essentially this means, treat it like you do other content, and we've got some examples of why this focuses on verification.
Right. In my company, Storyful, and really a lot of news organizations that have been working within social news gathering, verification is the key to what makes social media, user-generated content, eyewitness reporting useful for news, is that we know this is something we can trust. However, so often, I do think we're getting better about it, but so often we've seen situations where social news has come across, everybody jumps on it, everyone wants to share it, it's an amazing thing, it's an amazing moment, I want to share this with everyone, and it ends up being wrong because of the lack of verification. We've seen this happen on several occasions lately. So for instance, the Eiffel Tower, this happened with This happened during the Charlie Hebdo. This happened during the Paris attacks. In this case with Brussels, they did light up the Eiffel Tower in the colors of Brussels, but they did not turn off the lights because of it. They turn off the lights every night. And as you saw, this has happened several times. I mean, I'd say 3 times within the last year, the Eiffel Tower being turned off as a moment of remembrance thing has gone around on social quite a bit in news. And so that's been one that we've seen happen a lot. Maybe we can get that one together in the future.
And I think we're going to talk about transparency later, and what we're seeing more often, this example from Mashable is, so initially when reports of the Eiffel Tower going dark, it did go dark, just not for the reasons that people thought, and then they follow up with a very transparent update on that story, which is definitely a shift that we've seen over the last 4 years. And then most recently in Brussels.
Right. And we saw this one quite a bit last week, where several news organizations were sharing photos that had been distributed that were actually from a bombing in Moscow several years ago. And they were saying, these are photos from right now inside of Brussels. These photos were everywhere. We were seeing this. This was being placed on front pages. This was out there in the world. And this is something that happens pretty often in big news stories, something that's old, something that comes from somewhere else. People do have good intentions. It's not because there's someone necessarily actively trying to make this happen, but looking into it, figuring out where have you seen these before, where else has this been, doing that verification and due diligence. In this case, thankfully, the debunking of this image happened pretty quickly, I think. A lot of this got corrected pretty quickly this time around.
There is one of the reasons why a code of practice is useful is because if you know that your news organization is following this, it makes you think about it as you're going through the process. So there is a lot of, and the reason why we've been able to bring a lot of people together on this is because it is about protecting our image as an industry as much as it is about individuals, because the audience out there don't necessarily separate us out when they're talking about journalists or news organizations. And verification is becoming easier, and there are people out there to help with verification and resources, but also just thinking about it means that the way that I was able to work out some of these videos is people underneath the YouTube videos were saying, it's not Brussels, it's here. And all that takes quite a lot of time is just looking at people who know better already and give you a lead to go on. So,
and in the case of these photos too, doing a quick reverse image search, quickly it turned up that these were not from a new event.
So being transparent with the audience about the verification status of Ugc. This is something that we debated quite seriously because I'm sure everyone has a caveat that they can put on content that says that they can't verify in any way at all. However, we know that that's not true now. There is always a journey that you can take in verifying a piece of content, and actually informing your audience who is following along on social and coming to you for an explanation. They know as well that you can go some way in verifying that content. And so we've got some examples here from Mandy that explains some of that language that Storyful uses.
Right, and certainly ours is not necessarily the standard, but I think that readers and journalists are really starting to almost come to standard terms about the kinds of words that indicate that where we are with where this content is. And this is some of what we use at Storyful. What you see on the left side, this is actually something we publish for our clients internally, but it does show you, for instance, how we verify stories, and we're saying to them, this is confirmed, this is how we know what we know, this is how we know this is confirmed. Other status, as you may see, as in this tweet, checking, this is something that's reported, we're looking into it, it is unconfirmed right now. So words like checking, unconfirmed, you see some of those out there, but stressing that the transparency level is, this is not confirmed until it's 100% by whatever that standard is at your news organization. Make sure that you're being transparent about that, whatever that language may be. In our case, we'll say unconfirmed, checking, just so that people know, yes, we're looking into this, we're aware this is happening.
This
There it
is a safety announcement.
It's complete, confirmed.
So the other side of this is also starting to think about how you document your verification process for an audience. Now, you might decide that you just want to report when something is confirmed or unconfirmed, or you might want to start thinking about how you explain how you have been able to verify. So the actual process. So yes, as a news organization, we can say that this happened here at this time, or we are unable to confirm the original source at this point. This is quite a foreign concept or an alien concept to some people, and it sounds like it might be clunky or messy. But actually what you need to really get your head around now is the fact that the audience who is particularly interested in this story will be searching for it on social media by themselves. They will have access to that same information, and they will be going through that process. And if it doesn't look like you're going through that process yourself, they might question why. And we definitely see, if you just look at tweets in response to news organizations' tweets about news, you will see that kind of chatter going on. You don't need to buy it, you don't need to respond to everyone, but you just need to know that they are following along with you. So, considering there's a double spelling mistake there. Sorry, that shouldn't be in the actual code. Considering the emotional state and safety of contributors. So this isn't just about verification. This is very much about the way that we deal with the people who are creating content that we need and we are using to tell some of the biggest stories. And I've got an example here. Usually I'm not kind enough to blank out some of these names, but this is a very good example. This is from a shooting, a campus shooting in Oregon. And the first tweet on the left, oh my God, there's someone shooting on campus. Now, I've just shown you two tweets there. Hi, are you safe? Can you DM me when you find shelter? I'm a reporter for you can fill in the blank yourself. And then immediately asking students to DM you right now is pathetic. Now, this person received hundreds, if not thousands, of responses from news organizations asking her to DM them or asking them for photos, or did you take any photos? Are you able to share with us? Not only that, multiple people from the same news organizations were communicating with her, asking her exactly the same thing. Sometimes from different shows, sometimes from just different parts of the newsroom, sometimes just different shifts. But this poor woman was bombarded with requests from journalists. She follows up. She's giving a commentary. Students are running everywhere. Holy God. People are saying, please stay safe and let us know when you're willing to speak. And then people are following that up with a lot of abuse towards the journalists, which we see a lot as well. Now, what we're trying to, this is about considering the emotional state and safety of contributors. What we're trying to say is, yes, we know you need we know that story is going to be a story, but there is a difference between getting that photo from them when they're hiding in fear of their lives and getting it when they're safe. And there are technical considerations to consider as well. If you are a journalist and you are communicating with that person who is hiding, what happens if they didn't mute their phone? What happens if their phone bings with that request? Okay, so yes, they don't have to respond to you is an argument that you can make, but what happens if just by your act of doing that they are identified? Or and we've seen it before, people who commit atrocities who are following it along are monitoring their own progress on social media. And if you are communicating with people who or flagging up these photos that exist showing a particular angle, that then it might be quite easy for a perpetrator to seek them out. So these are and there is no right or wrong answer. What we're just asking for you to do is to consider this when you are news gathering. And the final kind of, when she was safe, and if you're a reporter looking for a story, read these words next carefully, I am not interested. And I wonder why. She was absolutely bombarded. at the moment, we don't have a solution for bombarding people, but I think we do have a solution for timing.
And coordination, frankly. I mean, at least within your own newsroom, saying, I've reached out to this person, that no one else needs to do this. We don't need 5 people from our news organization to be adding to this onslaught of what's happening to somebody. So internal coordination, sort of taking the temperature of the situation and knowing the approach, knowing your own timing, and honestly just being more sensitive about it in general.
I know that some organizations do try and coordinate so there's just one person, but I mean, even if you are operating in a group of news organizations, like it's a group of newspapers or a group of TV stations, if there is a way to consolidate all of those messages into one timely message, I think that is going. You don't get anything bombarding people, and this is proof of that. So there is some overlap in some of these, because we did need to. There are some themes that are quite common, but we needed to address very specific elements. So, considering the risk inherent in asking a contributor to produce and deliver UGC, including whether it incentivizes others to take unnecessary risks, and we've got a slide there. So, this is the argument between assignments versus discovery. Asking people to create content for you versus finding content that already exists. And there's a huge spectrum there, because if it's an unusually snowy day in late April and you want your audiences to send the best snow pictures into you, that is a fairly low risk assignment. But if you ask them to send pictures of the hurricane that's hitting, that is not. And actually, if you ask people for that content without people realizing the risk that they might go outside and film it, we are often armed with a lot more knowledge about an ongoing news event than the audience, because we're in the process of reporting it.
Right, and the thing is when there's something that's already out on social media, when they're publishing it, finding that, doing outreach there, it's a more ethically sound position than reaching out to someone and saying, oh, hey, can you go take pictures of that? Which we see happen. People, actually one I remember very vividly is during the Kenya Mall attack a few years ago, there were people hiding, and they'd snapped a couple photos, and you were seeing news organizations responding to them saying, do you think you could film some video? I mean, these people are hiding for their lives, and people are asking them, do you think maybe you could film some video and send it to us? This person is not on their insurance plan. This person is a normal person who is not necessarily trained to equip with this to be equipped for this situation, but also, they're going to put their lives at risk just to film a video for you. That's a very ethically unsound position to come from. So that assignment versus discovery, what's already out there, what's already been there, versus actually asking someone to get something for you.
And also there's if you think even more deeply about it, there are people have people outside of our industry who are in our audience have a very kind of a different view of how news is captured to us. And you can see that in when you see news readers in movies or reporters in movies. Actually, if you ask someone to create something and you're expecting it to have that same kind of view or objective view that your own reporters might have, no one is trying to deceive you, but they're going out there trying to film what they think you want, what they think news needs to be, to take a risk, perhaps take a risk that they don't know that they're taking. Go ahead.
Could I sort of jump in and just ask, how does Storyful then deal with those types of stories when that's your job to obviously curate UGC and distribute it out to media publishers as well?
Right.
So how do you help with that, and what's your kind of...
Yeah, for us, this is a huge aspect of why our business really exists, because we only work in what is already out there, and we specifically will not create any kind of assignment type relationship with anyone out there to avoid those kinds of ethical situations altogether. Now, we do have people who will work with us later on. They maybe we curated something of theirs in the past and they were happy about that and they submit it to us later on. But in terms of doing assignments, that is not something we want to get into for sure. So things that are already out on social and social discovery from there is our specialty for that reason.
I don't think what we're not saying though is that no assignments should be done. We're not saying that people shouldn't do anything or they should do things with this code. Just to consider that it's not one assignment is not the same as the next, and that these things need to be considered. When I worked a lot on UGC from the various uprisings in Libya and Egypt and Syria for a long time. And people were desperate to get content out. And when I was doing it, I set up relationships where it only tapped into what they were producing already. We never asked them to film anything we never asked them to capture anything that we knew was going on. And a lot of the time, what they were capturing was informing the reporting rather than the other way around, the reporting informing what they were capturing. Because these people were so desperate and you were so kind of keen to help them or keen to show the story, but actually there was a responsibility there. And this actually leads into the next one, considering technical measures to ensure anonymity of sources when required. So my example of this is when dealing with live UGC from Syria and being able to work out exactly where these people were standing on rooftops. And if I could do that with Google Earth, then so could the Syrian army. And so thinking about that is even though it's the most incredible footage, if it puts someone's life directly in danger, is there something you consider? There's some more recent examples.
Right, so a great example here, we had a video at Storyful very recently that was submitted to us directly from a source of a gangland shooting at a boxing weigh-in in Dublin. And this was a pretty serious video, amazing footage, an amazing story. However, the person that sent this to us knew that their life could be in danger just by the fact that they captured this. They have faces, they could be placed there. So usually, and we'll talk later about crediting and things like that, and usually that's a big thing for us. But in this case, the source and keeping that source safe and keeping that source protected was a huge role in what we had to be doing. So they wanted this video out there. It was very important to them that this be distributed, that people know this happened, but they did not want this to come back to them. So in this case, for instance, this was not something uploaded on their own social accounts. They didn't want that coming back to them. So we ended up putting this on our accounts, distributing it that way, but making sure that this source is safe. And along the same lines, you see in the photo here on the right, it's not said in the text here, but it was definitely part of our discussions when we were pulling this text together, of not only the protecting the source who sent along something or who provided something for their safety, but also thinking about the safety of people inside of those videos. In this case, these are people who witnessed this shooting happening. In this case, when this was used, and I believe that several news organizations did this on their own, and we did some of this as well, just making sure that they also couldn't be identified because they too would be witnesses to this. Do you have a question?
Yeah, especially on this. How do you know that this was a planned murder? This was a setup of a gangland murder. How do you know the person who is videoing this was not part of the gang that set up this murder? I just happen to have really good video of a murder of a gangland rival. I'm just saying, theoretically, how do you know that this person, far from being protected, was not a part of the whole plan to kill this person and make it very public?
Well, for one thing, we did talk to this source, and this wasn't just, we got some random video and we're just running with that. This was a huge part of that. One thing, the verification process, but also working out with that source what their situation was, who they were. We're not police, so police would certainly investigate something about whether someone was connected to that. But in this case, in our terms of talking to the person, what their connection was to the event, why they were there in the first place, really determining all of that as to kind of our own position as to why we'd work with something like that.
I've put a note on here about embedding, and this follows on from what Mandy said about you put that in your own player, didn't you? But I'm a big advocate for crediting, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But sometimes there are times when crediting someone by embedding that content directly might put them in danger. When people are sharing on social, they are sharing with their friends usually, and they don't know that we have tools to go and find all of this content by geotagged, searches and all of this. And actually, they might not realize that it is public to the world. And so embedding content might put them in danger because it links directly to them. And therefore, there is a case sometimes for working out how you host that elsewhere. And that actually leads into some of the other points. There's a few in a row here because they're very close to each other, and I'll just read through them. So, seeking informed consent for the use of UGC through direct communication with the individual who created it. Being transparent about how content will be used and distributed to other platforms. And we've got some examples of that.
So for one thing, including examples of how we do some of our outreach at Storyful, we want to make sure that anyone that we're talking to knows exactly what we're talking about when we're saying clearance for use on news. So we put as much as we can in the actual text, but we also have a link that has a full explanation if they want to know all of the rights included. So at this link, for instance, it says, this could be used on other platforms. This is for news organizations to use, what we mean by news organizations, how that would be distributed to them, just so that they have all the information. And of course, having a back and forth with them as they have questions, but really making sure that they have a full explanation of what it means of informed consent, what they're signing up for when they're saying, yes, you can share this with news organizations.
So obviously a lot of the time you're requesting permission via a tweet. So what does your request actually get you via a tweet is something that you need to think about. So I've just got a few points here. In breaking news, if you are asking for permission to use something, actually you need to think, does this request give me archive rights? If, hey, can we use your photo, I work for, blah, blah, blah. Does that give you archive rights? You're not specifying the length of time that you wish to use that. Are you able to use it beyond today? You're also not specifying the platform. If you're messaging from an account that is associated with a particular show, then it's likely that people will presume it's therefore just going to go on that program. But actually, you're probably going to want to use it across other platforms. And also, these are some things that I've heard from lawyers who know about it, but please do not take it as legal advice. But one of the things that Adam Rendell, who's a particular expert in this, says always warns is, what if they retract their permission? And on Twitter, if you get permission on Twitter, and certainly in the UK, if someone retracts that permission, at any point, that retraction stands. So you have to remove that content. You are not allowed to use that if it's been negotiated by Twitter, which points to a reason that why you should actually think about getting a really comprehensive permission, so that you don't have to work out a comprehensive way to monitor all the requests that you've received on Twitter forevermore. I just want to go back to the two points as well, because there's some other examples. So informed consent is going back to this issue of making sure someone understands exactly what they are agreeing to, and that they know how they will be exposed through giving you permission. And being transparent about how content will be used and distributed to other platforms. So Eyewitness Media Hub did a lot of research around the Charlie Hebdo attacks. And there was, and I hope I'm not butchering this example, but there was one example of a woman who captured some of the most compelling video, and she was a florist, and everyone was communicating with her, was putting her name on all of the videos, in all of the stories, and now her florist business is 10, 20 pages into Google whenever you search for her name, and she said that it had really impacted her business. And perhaps if she'd have known what it meant to give permission to all of those news organizations, she may have asked for her name to be removed. And I think the point here is it's not necessarily her responsibility to think to ask that.
Right.
Because she will have had a bad experience, and she might share her bad experience, and that will affect who gives permission in the future.
And to that end, you don't, you see sometimes when there's some doing a lot of outreach on a particular piece of content, some get very legalese, which it's great to try to get everything out there, but really making it as easy to understand as possible and giving them an avenue to ask questions as well. Saying, can we have permission to do this platform, perpetuity, royalty free, all of these things. And it's like, well, yeah, it all makes sense. It's really good you got that out there. But what does that mean to a layman? Like this, you're a journalist, you're kind of rushing them into reading through this. They're reading this on probably a tiny screen. Can you give them some way to digest this and ask questions and follow up? So I think that's a big part of that too.
The last point here is, can it be more effective by being more ethical? We know from the example we've seen earlier that there are certain ways of approaching people that yield no results. There is certain legalese that if you just throw that at people as the first way of communicating with them, especially if they're in danger, it doesn't necessarily yield results, or it might scare people off. So there may be more effective ways that are actually, and because they're ethical, they might be more effective. So now we get onto a rather meaty one.
Yeah.
Giving due credit to the owner of the content, providing that consideration has been given to potential consequences, like we just spoke about, including their physical, mental, and reputational well-being. And I'll let Mandy talk about the example, but just from the debate that we had about this particular point, and this is one of the ones that raised the most debate, this is a consideration, and giving due credit to the owner there's no mention of money here. There's not even a mention of on-screen credit. It's just really to consider how it is most appropriate within your organization or within the situation to recognize that person for the content that they are giving you that you really need.
Right, and thinking about how we credit content from others. When you're getting something from another news organization, you're not saying, we got this via internet, we got this via telephone. You're saying, no, we got this from Reuters. This is from the Associated Press. This is from this other news organization that reported this fact, and we're working this into our coverage. So taking that same approach, there's a lot of different ways that can happen. One of my favorite credits that I see pretty regularly, AJ Plus on all of their social videos. You can see up in the top left. It looks nice. It's not obtrusive, but they're giving on-screen credit to a user there, where they have the YouTube icon, the username. Not at all obtrusive there, but it can be stylized. This can look nice. This doesn't have to be giant red letters put on top of something, but making sure that that person, when they're submitting something like that, they're going to get credit for that if that's appropriate for the situation.
And also, it doesn't have to be people sometimes say, well, what if it's a really weird username that I don't want to put up? Well, if you're seeking permission from the person for the content and you're getting it legitimately, you're having a conversation and you're finding out their name. And actually, on-screen credits is one way, or putting it in the caption in printed copy is another way. Mm-hmm. Mentioning it in the text of a story or in the voiceover of the reporter is another way of recognizing that person. Also, that person may not wish to be credited for anonymity reasons, which will fit in line with your organization's own anonymity policy. But it certainly seems that it would be ethical to find out and ask them.
Right, and ask them how they want to be credited as well. I mean, that's something that we're often doing in that follow-up is, do you want to be credited to your channel? Do you want it to be to your name? Do you have a different name? Do you have some people have a whole online persona that they're working, with their Instagrams connect to their Facebook and everything has the same username. So sometimes they'll want to use that, but a way they can be identified, it's going to come back the crediting the way they want. That way you might avoid having to credit some really gross username on YouTube or something.
And actually your company probably has a policy on the way you refer to sources or think about sources, and this really shouldn't be that far away from that policy, or it should certainly be part of that conversation for that policy. So the code, we spoke about the the content, the verification, the crediting. There are some other parts to the code that we wanted to bring in, and this definitely came in further down the line. This was not part of our original conversation, but it was raised by a number of us and a number of people who joined at various stages that we needed to raise the profile of certain issues relating to UGC in newsrooms. And that is that relates specifically to the safety of the people who are performing these roles in the newsroom. So a consideration, endeavoring to inform and equip journalists to confront the dangers of engaging with sources through social media networks and the digital footprint they leave behind.
One example of this, it can be about, I know you can talk a little bit about engaging with extremists. Some of the people that we have to talk to online as part of stories as journalists are going to be not always trustworthy and savory characters. I have in the past had a member of my staff be stalked by someone that they had reached out to as part of social outreach around a story, and that person became fixated on them and was pursuing them across social media for a long time. Being a supportive organization around what can happen on social. We're not any different from any other users when it comes to that, and we have to know that we're not supermen and superwomen when it comes to dealing with this.
I know some investigative journalists who will meet potentially unsavory sources in public places. They will have support from colleagues nearby. They will know who they are meeting, where they're meeting, and they have worked out a safe exit from that situation. If you have a junior staffer reaching out to people through social media who are involved in events and those people might be unsavory, as newsroom managers, do you know that staffer's exit route? Do you know who your staff are communicating with, and do they know how to protect themselves? That's not to say that everyone is bad out there, and actually it's often easy to know who the good guys are and when it's safe to do so. But perhaps if you're able to talk to them on the phone, this source, rather than exposing them to your social media profile, that might be a way to do it. Or use company email to reach out rather than through your personal social account. For engagement, we know that using personal social accounts is really good, and it makes you seem like a real makes you seem like a real person. But actually, there might be some cases, there might be some exceptions where you have to think before you expose yourself or your staff to that. One example of that I can speak to is, when in the first days of Syria, the people that journalists would communicate with were protesters who became activists, who became part of different factions, who became members of IS, and there was that change came almost suddenly, and you would reach out to someone in a just like you did when, hey, as a protester, can we use your? Actually, this person is not a protester. They are affiliated with a certain group, and actually, it might not be safe for a staff member to be communicating with them. And that seems to be much more relevant, every single day. Who are, especially as people who are out there are creating content like this and there to be found, just stop and think, who is this creating this content, and how do we keep safe? The other part of this then is the safety of journalists' well-being. They're being mindful of their well-being. So supporting and assisting journalists who are confronted with graphic or otherwise disturbing content, maintaining an organizational culture that enables journalists to seek help or speak out when they need to protect their mental health. Now, when we started doing this 4 years ago, no one knew about the dangers to staff who were sitting in newsrooms looking at graphic videos every day. They knew that it could be upsetting, but we didn't know that it was actually causing harm. And Eyewitness Media Hub have recently done some research on this. If you go to their Medium site or their website, you'll see it all. But these are just some stats. So 37% of the people they asked did not think they would see traumatic UGC. 46% were not prepared for it, and 56% had not considered seeing traumatic UGC could have a negative impact on them. It does have a negative impact.
And you see, and we've seen, anyone who's been in a newsroom has seen that kind of bravado. I know I can handle this. I've been in the field. I know I'm tough. You should be tough too. Seeing people kind of carrying that along with them when this is a completely different animal than what we've had in the past. Often you have junior staffers who this might be their first job very early on. They're just watching people being beheaded all day. That's not something that people can do for any extended period of time and not have something negative come of that. So it's a big part about creating a workplace culture where they're comfortable talking about it. If there is this air of toughen up around that, that's going to burn somebody out very quickly. It's going to make them leave our industry. It's going to make this a really bad experience, and it's going to make this something that isn't part of a newsroom culture that I know I don't want to be a part of something like that. So it's really about figuring out whether that's trauma training in your newsrooms, if it's about just meeting with staff regularly so they're aware of this, really just making it so that they can feel like, what, I need to take a break from this, or, I might need to take a couple days off after something like Paris, after something like Brussels. Just being aware of that conversation and making sure it's something that they can have.
It's in ONA's large conference in the US last year. I was on a panel with someone from the Dart Center who produced a lot of resources on this. And the important thing that it, for people who are coming to this and it's quite new to them, you can look at something that is graphic and it can upset you, and it should upset you, okay? And it still upsets people, but this is not just being upset. If you're exposed to it for a long period of time, it can damage your mental well-being. It's beyond upset. And there is no way to take one for the team either. If you are the more senior person in the newsroom, if you are the one that always looks at the worst stuff, you are exposing yourself to it. It's very difficult to manage, and that's why it's not enough to just have something on your intranet. Oh, here, go to call this number if you feel affected. As Mandy says, it's about fostering a culture in your newsroom where someone a junior person who is new to the job and wants to prove themselves still feels comfortable going to their boss and saying, I need to take a break, and knowing that it's not going to damage their rise throughout the company. Just listed here are 2 examples of resources available. The Dart Center, this is what they focus on, and they've made a lot of effort to provide resources for UGC specifically, and Pointer does a workshop on this, but there's lots.
Yeah.
There's lots of advice out there.
And I highly recommend checking out the Eyewitness Media Hub study. It really does get a lot into some of the things that can be done internally, so even just getting those conversations going. But and I think the thing that's most notable about it is that, what they're finding from DART and what Eyewitness Media Hub has said, the symptoms of this are much like post-traumatic stress disorder, coming back from a war zone. It's all very, very similar symptoms, very similar outcomes from something like that. And so it is something that needs to be taken very seriously, which is why it made it into this code in the first place.
It's not even similar. It's the same.
Identical.
It's
Yeah.
the same. So we need to start wrapping up, and we're doing okay for time. My message from today, definitely, as people, and I think yours as well, but you can be, these are not barriers. They shouldn't be barriers. This is about sustainability. This is about how we continue to have people sharing their content with us and not just share it with their friends on WhatsApp groups. If we treat them badly, they will not come to us. We will never see it, and we need this content. If we didn't need it, we wouldn't be asking for it, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. So all of this code is designed to work in a competitive environment. And from the list of people that you can see who are already supporting this code, we have competitors who are on here. The BBC, CNN, AFP, The Guardian, reportedly, Storyful, First Draft, Eurovision. These organizations who some work together, some compete with each other, have all agreed to support this code. It is not about damaging, limiting competition. It's the opposite. It's about maintaining the sustainability of working with this content. We would love for your news organizations to consider supporting this code. It is online now. The link to it has been tweeted out many times today. You can also email socialnewsgathering@journalists.org if you wish to do it. If you want to come and do it today, you can come and find either of us, and we will have that conversation. Specifically, if you want to know how to sell it to your boss, and I've got a good idea since I've been trying to get all of these people on board. I'm going to be in room 4 at 2:15 today for you to come and have a private chat with me to talk about the stuff that, I'm concerned about this, how, it will remain in confidence. This is really important, I think. And the reason why we did this under ONA is because ONA can operate as an independent body here. Many of the news organizations that we hope to sign up are affiliated as members of ONA. It's not owned by a news organization, it's owned by an association for journalists.
Well, before we wrap up, does anyone have any questions about, yeah?
In the list of people that you're talking to, are you talking to people like Facebook about their buying?
So this list of people we've talked to them. They are supporting. They are you'll see their names as supporters on the code. We just started the conversation. I fully expect to have a conversation with Google and Facebook if they want to.
The reason I asked is with Google's sort of AMP and other caching devices, your first copy of the story is already in their hands and it's cached by them. If you retract and put something else out, there's no instant guarantee that cache is going to be reflected by Google and people like that. So they are part of the problem
And potentially the solution. So
Yes.
we'll see.
I mean, I don't think if anyone wants to support these principles, I don't think that we're going to turn them away. So we would love for them to come and express support for it.
Other questions? All right.
Okay.
I guess it was that comprehensive.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.